Sarah sat in stunned silence as Mr. Wilkins' words echoed through the boardroom. The HOA was amending the bylaws to ban her vibrant indigo paint job, effectively nullifying the approval they had granted just a week prior. "You can't do that," she said, her voice low and even. "The bylaws are clear. Any changes to the exterior of a home must be approved by the board." Mr. Wilkins leaned forward, his expression smug. But you see, Mrs. Saunders, the board has the authority to update and amend the bylaws as we see fit, and we determined that your paint choice is in direct violation of the HOA's aesthetic standards." Sarah felt a surge of anger coursing through her veins. "This is nothing more than a blatant attempt to undermine my rights as a homeowner. You're changing the rules to suit your own agenda." The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding her gaze. Sarah knew she was up against a formidable foe, a cabal of power-hungry individuals who would stop at nothing to maintain their control over the neighborhood. "Be that as it may, the amendment has been made and it's now binding," Mr. Wilkins said, his tone dripping with false regret. "You have 30 days to repaint your home in an approved color scheme or face significant fines and potential legal action." Sarah's mind raced, searching for a way to counter this latest move. She had to find a loophole, a technicality, something that could give her the upper hand once again. "And what if I refuse to comply?" she asked, her chin raised defiantly. Mr. Wilkins' lips curled into a cruel smile. "Then we'll have no choice but to take you to court. And trust me, Mrs. Saunders, the HOA has the resources and the determination to bury you in legal fees until you have no choice but to submit." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She knew the HOA wasn't bluffing. They had the power and the influence to make good on their threats. But she refused to back down. This was a fight she couldn't afford to lose. As she left the boardroom, her mind was a whirlwind of strategies and contingency plans. She had to find a way to outmaneuver the HOA to turn their own tactics against them. That evening, Sarah pored over the HOA bylaws, searching for any loopholes or ambiguities she could exploit. She knew the board had acted quickly to amend the rules, but surely there was still a way to challenge their decision. Suddenly, her eyes landed on a clause that made her heart skip a beat. In the event of a bylaw amendment, all affected homeowners must be notified in writing and given the opportunity to appeal the decision within 14 days. A slow smile spread across Sarah's face. "Asterisk got you, asterisk," she thought, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she drafted a formal appeal. The next morning, she hand-delivered the appeal to the HOA office, making sure to get a signed receipt as proof of delivery. The secretary, her lips pressed into a thin line, accepted the document with visible reluctance. "The board will review this immediately," she said, her voice strained. "I'm sure they will," Sarah replied, a hint of triumph in her tone. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah waited with bated breath, anticipating the HOA's response. She kept a close eye on her mailbox, but no letter arrived. As the 14-day deadline approached, she knew the board was scrambling to find a way to dismiss her appeal. Finally, on the final day, a thick envelope arrived. Sarah tore it open, her heart pounding, and scanned the contents. To her delight, the board had been forced to grant her appeal, citing a technicality in the bylaws that required a 75% majority vote to amend any existing rules. "This isn't over, Mrs. Saunders," the letter concluded, Mr. Wilkins' signature scrawled at the bottom. "We'll be back, and next time, we won't be so lenient." Sarah's lips curled into a triumphant grin. Asterisk bringing on asterisk, she thought, already planning her next move in this high-stakes game of HOA dominance. The raindrops pattered against the windowpane as Sarah sat in the HOA boardroom, her gaze fixed on the faces of the 5 stern-faced members before her. They shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances, the silence thick with tension. Finally, the HOA president, a middle-aged man with a meticulously trimmed mustache, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Saunders, your request to repaint the exterior of your home is highly irregular." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "I'm simply following the proper protocol as outlined in the HOA bylaws, Mr. Wilkins. According to Section 4.2, any changes to the exterior of a home must be approved by the board." Mr. Wilkins frowned, his fingers drumming against the polished mahogany table. "Yes, well, the board has never approved a request to repaint an entire home before. Surely you can understand our hesitation." "I understand completely," Sarah said, her voice smooth and measured, "which is why I expect the board to make a decision within the 30-day timeline specified in the bylaws." The board members exchanged uneasy glances, and Sarah knew she had them cornered. The HOA's precious rules were now being used against them, and they had no choice but to play by her terms. "The board will need time to carefully review your request," Mr. Wilkins said, his jaw tightening. "We'll be in touch with our decision." "Of course," Sarah replied, rising from her seat. "I look forward to hearing from you." As she stepped out of the boardroom, a small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. The HOA's fear was palpable, and she knew she had the upper hand. Now it was just a matter of waiting for their response. Over the next few days, Sarah kept a close eye on her mailbox, anticipating the HOA's decision. But the days ticked by and no letter arrived. She knew the 30-day deadline was rapidly approaching, and the board was likely scrambling to find a way to deny her request. Finally, on the 29th day, a large envelope arrived, the HOA's logo stamped on the front. Sarah tore it open, her heart pounding, and scanned the contents. To her surprise, the letter was not a rejection, but a reluctant approval. The board had decided in a close 3-2 vote to allow her to repaint the entire exterior of her home, provided she use only approved color palettes. Sarah's lips curled into a wicked grin. The HOA had fallen right into her trap, and now she would unleash her true plan. That weekend, she set to work, meticulously covering every inch of her home in a vibrant, eye-catching shade of indigo. The neighbors watched in stunned silence as she transformed her once bland residence into a vibrant, defiant statement. As the final brushstrokes were applied, Sarah stepped back, admiring her handiwork. Asterisk, this is just the beginning, asterisk, she thought, her gaze sweeping across the pristine, cookie-cutter homes that surrounded her. The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of frantic knocking at her door. Peering out the window, she saw Mrs. Wilkins, her face flushed with panic. "Sarah, dear, what have you done?" The older woman cried, wringing her hands. "The HOA is furious. They're threatening to fine you, and they say they'll take you to court if you don't repaint immediately." Sarah opened the door, a serene smile on her face. "I'm simply following the board's directive, Mrs. Wilkins. They approved my request to repaint the entire exterior, and I've done just that." Mrs. Wilkins gaped at her, stunned. But this isn't what they meant. They expected you to use one of the approved colors, not—" She gestured helplessly at the bold indigo hue. But you see," Sarah said, her voice dripping with feigned innocence, "the bylaws don't specify which colors are approved. That was entirely up to my own interpretation." The sound of car doors slamming made them both turn. A caravan of black SUVs had pulled up in front of Sarah's home, and a small army of HOA officials was marching toward her door, their faces twisted with rage. As they approached, Sarah braced herself for the confrontation. This was only the beginning of her fight against the HOA's tyranny. Whatever they had in store for her, she was ready. The HOA officials stormed up Sarah's driveway, their faces etched with fury. She stood her ground, shoulders squared, as they surrounded her on the doorstep. Mr. Wilkins, the HOA president, stepped forward, his eyes narrowed to slits. "Mrs. Saunders, what is the meaning of this abomination?" He gestured angrily at the vibrant indigo coating her home. Sarah met his gaze calmly. "I'm simply following the board's directive as outlined in your approval letter. You stated that I could repaint the exterior, and that's exactly what I've done." Mr. Wilkins' face reddened, the vein in his forehead throbbing. "But we expected you to use one of the pre-approved color palettes, not this hideous monstrosity." Sarah arched an eyebrow, her tone dripping with feigned innocence. "I'm afraid the bylaws don't specify which colors are considered approved. That was left open to my interpretation." The surrounding HOA officials murmured in outrage, shooting her venomous glares. Mr. Wilkins bristled, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "This is unacceptable, Mrs. Saunders," he spat. "You're in blatant violation of the HOA's rules. We have no choice but to issue you a hefty fine and take you to court if you refuse to repaint immediately." Sarah folded her arms across her chest, a small smile playing on her lips. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. Wilkins. According to Section 4.2 of the bylaws, if the board fails to respond to a request within 30 days, it's considered automatic approval. And as you can see, I'm well within that timeline." The color drained from Mr. Wilkins' face, and the other officials exchanged panicked glances. Sarah could almost see the gears turning in their minds, desperately searching for a loophole or technicality they could use against her. This is preposterous." Mr. Wilkins sputtered. "You can't seriously expect us to allow this monstrosity to remain." Sarah shrugged nonchalantly. "I'm simply following the rules as you've always insisted we do. If you have a problem with the color, I suggest you take it up with the board. After all, they're the ones who approved my request." The officials erupted into a cacophony of outraged protests, their voices rising in a desperate attempt to assert their authority. But Sarah stood firm, her expression serene and unwavering. Finally, Mr. Wilkins raised a trembling hand, silencing the crowd. "Very well, Mrs. Saunders. We'll convene an emergency board meeting to discuss this situation. But mark my words, we will not let this stand." With that, the HOA contingent retreated to their SUVs, their taillights disappearing into the rain-soaked streets. Sarah watched them go, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. Asterisk, round one goes to me, asterisk, she thought, closing the door and locking it behind her. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as the HOA board scrambled to find a way to undo Sarah's bold paint job. She received a steady stream of angry phone calls, threatening letters, and even a few unannounced visits from HOA representatives, all of them demanding that she repaint her home immediately. But Sarah remained steadfast, citing the bylaws and the board's own approval of her request. She knew they were desperate, grasping at straws, and she took a perverse pleasure in watching them squirm. Finally, after a week of intense deliberation, the HOA board convened another meeting, this time with Sarah in attendance. As she stepped into the boardroom, she could feel the tension crackling in the air. Mr. Wilkins cleared his throat, his expression grim. "Mrs. Saunders, the board has reached a decision regarding your paint job." Sarah leaned back in her chair, her gaze unwavering. "I'm listening." "We've determined that while your request was technically approved, the resulting color choice is a clear violation of the HOA's aesthetic standards." Mr. Wilkins paused, his eyes narrowing. "Therefore, we decided to amend the bylaws effective immediately to prohibit the use of such garish colors on the exterior of homes." Sarah's heart sank as the implications of his words sank in. The HOA was moving the goalposts, changing the rules to suit their own agenda, and she had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning of their fight. Sarah sat in stunned silence as Mr. Wilkins' words echoed through the boardroom. The HOA was amending the bylaws to ban her vibrant indigo paint job, effectively nullifying the approval they had granted just a week prior. "You can't do that," she said, her voice low and even. "The bylaws are clear. Any changes to the exterior of a home must be approved by the board." Mr. Wilkins leaned forward, his expression smug. But you see, Mrs. Saunders, the board has the authority to update and amend the bylaws as we see fit, and we determined that your paint choice is in direct violation of the HOA's aesthetic standards." Sarah felt a surge of anger coursing through her veins. "This is nothing more than a blatant attempt to undermine my rights as a homeowner. You're changing the rules to suit your own agenda." The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding her gaze. Sarah knew she was up against a formidable foe, a cabal of power-hungry individuals who would stop at nothing to maintain their control over the neighborhood. "Be that as it may, the amendment has been made, and it's now binding," Mr. Wilkins said, his tone dripping with false regret. "You have 30 days to repaint your home in an approved color scheme or face significant fines and potential legal action." Sarah's mind raced, searching for a way to counter this latest move. She had to find a loophole, a technicality, something that could give her the upper hand once again. "And what if I refuse to comply?" she asked, her chin raised defiantly. Mr. Wilkins' lips curled into a cruel smile. "Then we'll have no choice but to take you to court. And trust me, Mrs. Saunders, the HOA has the resources and the determination to bury you in legal fees until you have no choice but to submit." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She knew the HOA wasn't bluffing. They had the power and the influence to make good on their threats. But she refused to back down. This was a fight she couldn't afford to lose. As she left the boardroom, her mind was a whirlwind of strategies and contingency plans. She had to find a way to outmaneuver the HOA to turn their own tactics against them. That evening, Sarah pored over the HOA bylaws, searching for any loopholes or ambiguities she could exploit. She knew the board had acted quickly to amend the rules, but surely there was still a way to challenge their decision. Suddenly, her eyes landed on a clause that made her heart skip a beat. In the event of a bylaw amendment, all affected homeowners must be notified in writing and given the opportunity to appeal the decision within 14 days. A slow smile spread across Sarah's face. "Asterisk got you, asterisk," she thought, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she drafted a formal appeal. The next morning, she hand-delivered the appeal to the HOA office, making sure to get a signed receipt as proof of delivery. The secretary, her lips pressed into a thin line, accepted the document with visible reluctance. "The board will review this immediately," she said, her voice strained. "I'm sure they will," Sarah replied, a hint of triumph in her tone. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah waited with bated breath, anticipating the HOA's response. She kept a close eye on her mailbox, but no letter arrived. As the 14-day deadline approached, she knew the board was scrambling to find a way to dismiss her appeal. Finally, on the final day, a thick envelope arrived. Sarah tore it open, her heart pounding, and scanned the contents. To her delight, the board had been forced to grant her appeal, citing a technicality in the bylaws that required a 75% majority vote to amend any existing rules. "This isn't over, Mrs. Saunders," the letter concluded, Mr. Wilkins' signature scrawled at the bottom. "We'll be back, and next time, we won't be so lenient." Sarah's lips curled into a triumphant grin. Asterisk bring it on, asterisk, she thought, already planning her next move in this high-stakes game of HOA dominance. The rain had given way to a crisp autumn breeze, but the tension in the air was palpable as Sarah stood before the HOA board once more. She could feel their scrutinizing gazes boring into her, the atmosphere thick with unspoken hostility. Mr. Wilkins cleared his throat, his expression grim. "Mrs. Saunders, we've reviewed your appeal, and despite our reservations, we've been forced to uphold it. Sarah raised her chin, her eyes narrowing. I'm glad to hear it, Mr. Wilkins. The bylaws are quite clear on the procedures required for amending the rules. The HOA president's jaw tightened and Sarah knew she had struck a nerve. Yes, well, be that as it may, we intend to revisit the issue of exterior paint colors at our next board meeting. And this time, we'll make sure the changes are airtight. Sarah leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing on her lips. I look forward to it, Mr. Wilkins. But I must warn you, I'll be watching your every move, and I won't hesitate to challenge any amendments that don't follow proper protocol. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging uneasy glances. Sarah knew she had them on the defensive, and she intended to keep them that way. As the meeting adjourned, Sarah made her way back home, her mind racing with strategies and contingency plans. She knew that HOA was not about to give up, and she had to be prepared for their next move. That evening, as she sipped a glass of wine and pored over the bylaws, a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Peering out the window, she was surprised to see Mrs. Wilkins, her face etched with concern. Sarah, dear, hi. I'm so sorry to bother you. I had to come, the older woman said, her voice trembling. Sarah opened the door, her brow furrowed. Mrs. Wilkins, what's wrong? It's the HOA, Sarah, Mrs. Wilkins whispered, her eyes darting around nervously. They're planning something, I just know it. I overheard Mr. Wilkins and the others talking about taking drastic measures to stop you. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Drastic measures? What do you mean? Mrs. Wilkins wrung her hands, her face etched with worry. I'm not sure, but they seemed desperate, Sarah. They're determined to find a way to force you to repaint your home, no matter what it takes. Sarah's grip tightened on the doorframe, her knuckles turning white. Thank you for the warning, Mrs. Wilkins. I appreciate you looking out for me. The older woman nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I just hope you know what you're up against, my dear. The HOA is not to be trifled with. As Mrs. Wilkins hurried back to her own home, Sarah closed the door, her mind racing. She knew the HOA was capable of underhanded tactics, but the thought of them resorting to drastic measures sent a chill down her spine. She spent the rest of the evening pacing her living room, her gaze drawn to the vibrant indigo that now covered the exterior of her home. She had come too far to back down now, but the stakes had just been raised. The next day, Sarah arrived at the HOA office, her expression calm and composed. The secretary eyed her warily, her lips pressed into a thin line. I'd like to file a formal complaint against the board, Sarah said, her voice steady. The secretary's eyebrows shot up. A complaint? On what grounds? On the grounds of harassment and attempted intimidation, Sarah replied, sliding a thick envelope across the desk. I have documented evidence of the board's attempts to coerce me into repainting my home, including threats of legal action and drastic measures. The secretary's eyes widened as she scanned the documents, her face paling. This is highly irregular. I'll have to present this to the board immediately. See that you do, Sarah said, her gaze unwavering. And tell them that I won't be intimidated. I'll fight them tooth and nail, every step of the way. As she turned to leave, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation. She knew the HOA was not about to back down, and the thought of their drastic measures sent a chill down her spine. But she was determined to stand her ground, no matter the cost. The rain-soaked streets cast an eerie, gloomy veil over the neighborhood as Sarah peered out her window, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Ever since her confrontation with the HOA board, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Over the past few days, strange occurrences had begun to plague her home. Her security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned, her lawn sprinklers had gone haywire, and even her beloved cat had gone missing, only to return days later, shivering and clearly traumatized. Sarah knew the HOA was behind these incidents, their desperation to force her into compliance becoming increasingly apparent. But she refused to be cowed, her resolve only hardening with each new challenge. Tonight, as the shadows crept across her living room, Sarah heard a faint scratching sound coming from the front door. Heart pounding, she crept toward the entrance, peering through the peephole. To her horror, she saw a group of hooded figures huddled on her doorstep, their faces obscured. Without hesitation, she grabbed her phone and dialed the police, her voice trembling as she reported the trespassing. Within minutes, the sound of sirens pierced the night and the figures scattered, disappearing into the darkness. As the police officers took her statement, Sarah's hands shook with a mixture of fear and fury. This is no coincidence, she told them, her eyes narrowed. The HOA is behind this. They're trying to intimidate me, to force me to give in to their demands. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions skeptical. Ma'am, we understand your concerns, but we can't just accuse the HOA without solid evidence. For now, we'll increase patrols in the area and recommend you upgrade your security system. Sarah gritted her teeth, knowing full well that the HOA's influence likely extended far beyond the reach of the local police. But she couldn't back down, not when she was so close to breaking their stranglehold on the neighborhood. As the officers departed, Sarah turned her attention to her security cameras, determined to catch her would-be assailants in the act. She spent the next few days meticulously monitoring the footage, her eyes scanning every inch of her property for any sign of suspicious activity. Then one night she saw them, a group of hooded figures, moving stealthily across her lawn. Without hesitation, she called the police, providing them with the clear footage as evidence. This time, the officers were more receptive, their eyes widening as they reviewed the footage. "This is damning evidence, ma'am. We'll need to conduct a thorough investigation and bring the HOA board in for questioning." Sarah felt a surge of relief, but she knew the battle was far from over. The HOA had already proven their willingness to resort to underhanded tactics, and she couldn't afford to let her guard down. As the police investigation unfolded, Sarah braced herself for the inevitable retaliation from the HOA. She reinforced her home security, installed additional cameras, and even invested in a high-tech alarm system, all in a desperate bid to stay one step ahead of her adversaries. Then one morning, she found a package on her doorstep, a plain brown envelope with no return address. Heart pounding, she tore it open, her eyes widening as she pulled out a stack of photographs. The images were grainy and blurred, but she could clearly make out the faces of her neighbors, the same ones who had so meekly surrendered to the HOA's demands in the past. Each photograph was accompanied by a handwritten note, a chilling warning that sent a chill down her spine. "If you don't repaint your home within the next 72 hours, your neighbors will suffer the consequences." Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the images, the realization dawning on her that the HOA was willing to go to unprecedented lengths to crush her defiance. This was no longer just a battle over a paint job. It was a high-stakes war for the very soul of the neighborhood. The rain had given way to a thick, oppressive fog that shrouded the neighborhood in an eerie, otherworldly veil. Sarah stood on her doorstep, a stack of threatening photographs clutched in her trembling hands, her mind racing with 1,000 conflicting thoughts. She knew the HOA was desperate, willing to resort to any means necessary to force her into submission. The thought of her neighbors, innocent bystanders in this twisted power struggle, being caught in the crossfire made her stomach churn. Asterisk, I can't back down now, asterisk. She told herself, her jaw set with determination. Asterisk, but I can't let them hurt the people I care about either, asterisk. Steeling her nerves, Sarah made her way to the HOA office, the photographs tucked safely inside her jacket. The secretary eyed her warily as she approached the desk, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I need to speak with the board immediately," Sarah said, her voice steady and unwavering. The secretary hesitated, her gaze shifting uncomfortably. "I'm afraid the board is in a closed-door meeting at the moment. They're not to be disturbed." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "This is an emergency. Tell them it's about the consequences they've threatened against my neighbors." The secretary's face paled, and she hurriedly picked up the phone, her fingers trembling as she relayed the message. Within minutes, the heavy oak doors swung open, and Mr. Wilkins emerged, his expression a mixture of fury and thinly veiled panic. "Mrs. Saunders," he said, his voice dripping with false civility. "To what do we owe this unexpected visit?" Sarah pulled the photographs from her jacket, her gaze unwavering. "I think you know exactly why I'm here, Mr. Wilkins. These threats against my neighbors are unacceptable, and I won't stand for it." The HOA president's eyes narrowed as he scanned the images, his lips tightening into a thin line. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Mrs. Saunders. The board has not authorized any such actions." "Don't play dumb with me, Wilkins," Sarah snapped, her voice rising. "We both know the HOA is behind this. You're willing to terrorize innocent people just to get me to comply with your demands." Mr. Wilkins' expression hardened, and he gestured to the two burly security guards flanking him. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave, Mrs. Saunders. This is private HOA business, and you have no right to interfere." Sarah stood her ground, her chin raised defiantly. "Not until you guarantee the safety of my neighbors. If anything happens to them, I'll make sure the whole world knows about your corruption and your underhanded tactics." The HOA president's face contorted with rage, and for a moment, Sarah thought he might lunge at her. But then, a flicker of uncertainty flashed across his features, and he turned to the security guards with a curt nod. "Escort Mrs. Saunders off the premises," he said, his voice trembling with barely contained fury, "and make sure she understands the consequences of her continued interference." As the guards grabbed her arms, Sarah felt a surge of triumph. She had struck a nerve, and she knew it. The HOA was rattled, their usually ironclad grip on the neighborhood slipping through their fingers. "This isn't over, Wilkins," she spat, her gaze locked with his. "I won't stop until I expose your corruption and restore justice to this community." The guards roughly pushed her out the door, and Sarah stumbled, her heart pounding. But she refused to be cowed, her determination only growing stronger with each passing day. Asterisk, I'm not going to let them win, asterisk, she thought, her eyes narrowing with steely resolve. Asterisk, whatever it takes, I'll bring down the HOA and its tyrannical rule, asterisk. As she made her way back home, the fog seemed to thicken, casting an ominous pall over the neighborhood. But Sarah refused to let it dampen her spirit. She was in this fight for the long haul, and she was determined to emerge victorious, no matter the cost. The eerie silence that had settled over the neighborhood was shattered by the sudden wail of sirens, their piercing cries cutting through the thick fog like a knife. Sarah rushed to her window, her heart pounding as a caravan of police cars sped down the street, their lights flashing ominously. Asterisk, something's happened, asterisk, she thought, her grip tightening on the windowsill. Asterisk, but what, asterisk? Moments later, her phone began to ring, the caller ID flashing Mrs. Wilkins. Steeling herself, Sarah answered, her voice tense. Mrs. Wilkins, what's going on? The older woman's voice was shaky, laced with fear. Oh, Sarah, it's terrible. The O'Neill's house, it's on fire. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The O'Neills? But how? The police are saying it was arson, Mrs. Wilkins interrupted, her words tumbling out in a panicked rush. And they think the HOA might be involved. Sarah's blood ran cold. The O'Neills, the very same family who had dared to challenge the HOA's tyranny, were now paying the ultimate price for their defiance. And the HOA, their desperation to maintain their stranglehold on the neighborhood, had resorted to the most unthinkable of tactics. I'm on my way, Sarah said, her voice low and determined. She got to see the damage for herself, to bear witness to the HOA's ruthless actions. As she rushed out the door, the fog seemed to thicken, obscuring her view of the surrounding homes. But the flickering glow of the flames visible in the distance guided her path, her steps quickening with each passing moment. The scene that greeted her was nothing short of horrific. The O'Neills' once immaculate home was now a smoldering ruin, the roof collapsed, and the walls blackened by the intensity of the blaze. Firefighters swarmed the area, their hoses still trained on the smoking embers, while a crowd of distraught neighbors looked on, their faces etched with shock and horror. Sarah pushed her way through the crowd, her eyes scanning the scene for any sign of the HOA's involvement. And there, amidst the chaos, she spotted Mr. Wilkins, his face pale and drawn, speaking in hushed tones with a group of police officers. Without hesitation, Sarah marched up to him, her eyes narrowed with accusation. This is your doing, isn't it, Wilkins? The HOA is behind this. The HOA president recoiled, his expression shifting from one of feigned concern to naked panic. I have no idea what you're talking about, Mrs. Saunders. The police are still investigating the cause of the fire. Don't play dumb with me, Sarah spat, her voice laced with venom. We both know the HOA is capable of such heinous acts. You've gone too far this time, Wilkins. I won't rest until I've exposed your corruption and brought you and your cronies to justice. Mr. Wilkins opened his mouth to respond, but before he could utter a word, a police officer approached them, his face somber. Mr. Wilkins, we need to speak with you and the rest of the HOA board immediately, the officer said, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. We've uncovered evidence that suggests the fire was indeed an act of arson and that the HOA may have been involved. A hush fell over the crowd, and Sarah could feel the weight of their collective gaze shifting toward the HOA president, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and righteous indignation. Mr. Wilkins' face drained of color, and for the first time Sarah saw a glimmer of true fear in his eyes. He knew that his carefully constructed facade of power and control was crumbling, and that the reckoning he had long feared was finally upon him. As the police officers led the HOA board away, Sarah felt a sense of grim satisfaction wash over her. The battle was far from over, but she knew that she had finally dealt a blow to the HOA's stranglehold on the neighborhood. Asterisk, this is just the beginning, asterisk, she thought, her eyes narrowing with determination. Asterisk, he won't stop until the HOA's corruption is exposed and true justice is served, asterisk. The fog may have lifted, but the storm was far from over.